They started by taking my good name. By Thursday, they were trying to take my freedom. And it all began with a cup of coffee that shook in a friend's hand. My name is Walter Clayton. For 38 years, I was the manager of First Agricultural and Trust on Main Street. My world was columns of numbers, the weight of a handshake, and the quiet understanding that in a town like Oakhaven, a man's word and his credit were often the same thing. I retired at 67. My wife, Clara, had passed 2 years before. The big, old house felt like an echo chamber. So I built a new routine. My anchor. Every Sunday, Wednesday, and Friday morning, at 7:15 sharp, I walk the 4 blocks to the Sunrise Diner. I take the same booth by the window, the one with a clear view of the street and the faded "For Lease" sign in the old hardware store across the way. Mabel, who's been waiting tables there since the Nixon administration, has my coffee, black, 1 sugar, on the table before my coat is off. The regulars are part of the furniture. There's Marty, the owner, a big bear of a man with grease-stained aprons and a laugh that shakes the coffee cups. He inherited the diner from his father. It's not just his business, it's his chapel. Eleanor Rigby, yes, like the song, and she'll sigh if you mention it, is a retired school librarian. She sits at the counter with a mystery novel, her eyes missing nothing. Sheriff Roy Dalton holds court at the big corner table on Fridays with his deputies, but on Sundays he's alone with the newspaper, a quiet nod, our only greeting. We've banked together for decades. And there's Vince, a wiry, nervous man who used to work at the now-shutter printing plant. He drinks his tea silently, always seems to be calculating something in his head. He's a recent addition, maybe the last 5 years. We aren't friends, not exactly. We're regulars. It's a different thing. It's a promise of constancy, a silent agreement that the world outside can spin all it wants. But at 7:15 in that vinyl booth, the eggs will be over easy, the coffee will be hot, and the faces will be familiar. That changed last Sunday. Marty brought my coffee. His hand, usually as steady as a stone, trembled. The cup clattered against the saucer, a sharp, wrong sound in the gentle diner hum. Brown liquid sloshed over the rim. "Everything all right, Marty?" I asked, mopping the spill with my napkin. He didn't meet my eye. He just stared at the puddle on the formica, his face pale. "Big changes coming, Walt," he muttered, his voice thick. "Can't fight the tide." Then he turned and lumbered back to the kitchen, a man walking to his own gallows. I looked around. Eleanor was staring intently at her book, but she hadn't turned a page in 10 minutes. Vince was watching Marty's retreating back, a strange, tight smile on his lips. Sheriff Dalton was engrossed in the sports section, or pretending to be. The air in the diner, usually warm with grease and gossip, felt thin and cold. On Tuesday, I found out what Marty meant. I was reading the Oakhaven Gazette, the classifieds, a habit from my banking days. You always watch the commercial pulse. There it was, in the legal notices, a property transfer. Sunrise Diner, 101 Main Street. Sold by Martin Brewer to Heartland Heritage Holdings, LLC. The stated price made me put my reading glasses on, then take them off and clean them. $3.2 million for the Sunrise Diner. The building was worth maybe $400,000 on its best day. The business a struggling icon, maybe another 150. The math wasn't just off. It was a fantasy, a lie so blatant it was like a shout in a quiet room. A financial lie, my specialty. My first thought wasn't crime. It was pity. Maybe Marty was sick, desperate, got swindled by some slick city developer. I decided to talk to him man to man. Offer my help. It's what you do. On Wednesday morning, I didn't wait for my booth. I went around to the diner's back door, off the alley. The smell of stale grease and garbage was strong. The door was propped open with a milk crate. I could hear voices from inside, Marty's, low and pleading, and another, calmer, colder voice I didn't recognize. "Just keep things normal, Marty. Sir, the eggs." Smile at the regulars, especially the old banker. You don't talk to him. You don't look at him for 60 days. Then you retire to Florida like a rich man. It's simple. He's already asking questions, Marty whispered, his voice ragged with fear. Then he's your problem to manage, the cold voice said. Make him stop, or we will. I stood frozen in the alley, the cold seeping through my loafers. It wasn't a swindle. Marty was a cog in it, and I, Walter Clayton, retired bank manager, had just become a problem to manage. I backed away silently, my heart drumming a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I wasn't scared yet. I was activated. An old, familiar sense clicked into place, the sense of a number that doesn't add up, a ledger out of balance. They'd made a mistake. They put a financial lie on paper, and they told the man who spent a lifetime finding those lies to just look away. I went home. I didn't go to my booth. I went to my old study, to my computer. I started tracing Heartland Heritage Holdings, LLC. It was a dead end, a shell registered in Delaware. But shells have to move money. I began looking at other recent property sales in Oak Haven, the vacant lot behind the diner, the old hardware store across the street. All bought in the last 6 months, all by different vague LLCs, all at prices that were just a little too high. A pattern, not a swindle. A land grab. Someone was quietly, patiently assembling the entire downtown block. The diner was the last piece, and they were willing to pay a fictional premium to get it. Why? I was so deep in the county's online property records, my eyes straining at the screen, that I jumped when the doorbell rang. It was past 8 in the evening. I opened the door to find Sheriff Roy Dalton on my porch, his hat in his hands, his face grave. He wasn't in uniform. "Walt," he said, not meeting my eye. "We need to talk." Inside, the chill from the diner alley settled deep into my bones. The first rule of small towns: when the sheriff pays a house call after dark, and he's not smiling, your quiet life is over. He stepped in, and I closed the door on the world I knew. The game had begun, and I didn't know the rules, or who was playing, or what the final move would cost. But I knew one thing with the cold certainty of a balanced ledger. They'd just made their first big, logical mistake. They'd sent the banker the statement, and he was unaudited. Sheriff Roy Dalton didn't sit. He stood in my hallway, turning his hat in his hands like he was trying to wring water from it. The ceiling light cast deep shadows under his eyes. "Got a call today, Walt," he said, his voice low. Anonymous tip line. Said you'd been harassing Marty Brewer over at the diner, making threats about his business sale. Said you were unstable, talking about conspiracies. The floor beneath me felt unsteady. "Roy, you've known me 40 years. You know that's not." "I know," he cut in, finally looking at me. There was no friendliness in his gaze, only a weary professionalism. But I had to follow up. "It's my job." The call was specific. Said you'd been lurking around the back of the diner yesterday. "Is that true?" So they'd seen me in the alley. The cold voice had seen me. I want to talk to him as a friend. Heard a conversation I shouldn't have. "Roy, this sale isn't right. The price is a fantasy. It's a front for something." Dalton's jaw tightened. Marty confirmed the tip. Said you've been pressuring him, asking aggressive financial questions. He said he was worried about you. The betrayal was a physical blow. Marty, scared into lying about me. My mind raced. They'd managed the problem. They'd turned my concern into a mark against my character. This wasn't just a financial crime anymore. It was a social hit. "It's a lie, Roy. Check the property records. The sale price is impossible." "I'm not a banker, Walt. I see a signed contract and a seller saying he's happy with the deal. What I've got is a respected local businessman saying his old friend is causing him distress." He put his hat back on, a signal the conversation was over. "This is a warning. Stay away from the diner. Stop asking questions. For your own good." Grieving does funny things to a man's mind. People start to talk. Grieving. He brought Clara into it. The final, cruel twist to frame me as a lonely, confused widower. I had no words. After he left, the silence in the house was absolute and accusing. Thursday morning, I broke my routine. I couldn't face the diner. I went to the town library instead to use their public computers for deeper searches. I needed to trace the money. As I walked in, Eleanor Rigby was at the front desk, checking a cart of books. Our eyes met. Usually, she'd offer a small, knowing smile. Today, her eyes flickered away fast. She busied herself with the books, her posture rigid. The shunning had begun. I found a quiet terminal in the reference section. It took me 2 hours cross-referencing business registries to find a link. All the LLCs that had bought the surrounding lots were subsidiaries of a single parent company, Midwest Renewal Partners. And buried in a year-old Business Journal article, I found it. Midwest Renewal Partners was a shell company used by a development firm out of Cleveland that had a history of environmental violations. They buy cheap land polluted by old factories, get state grants for cleanup they never fully performed, then flip it. Oak Haven's downtown block wasn't valuable for what was on it. It was valuable for what might be under it. An old textile mill had burned down there in the 1950s. They were assembling the land to claim it was a brownfield site, suck up public cleanup money, and then maybe sell it to a big box store. The diner sale price was to inflate the apparent fair market value of the overall assemblage for the grant applications. It was fraud on top of fraud. I printed the evidence, my hands shaking with a fierce, clean anger. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was stealing from the town's future. When I left the library, the sky had darkened. I walked home, the printed pages a secret weapon in my satchel. Half a block from my house, I saw it. My mailbox, the old black wrought iron one Clara had picked out, was bent sideways, the door hanging open like a broken jaw. Not knocked over by a plow, wrenched, deliberately. I approached slowly. Inside, amidst the usual junk mail, was a single, plain white envelope. No stamp, no address. Just my name typed, Walter Clayton. I took it inside to my kitchen table. I used a letter opener, my banker's habit for neatness. A single sheet of paper. Stop digging. You found the mill. Now forget it. Your reputation is all you have left. The next message won't be in your mailbox. It was typed. Clean. Professional. They knew I'd been to the library. They tracked me. Or someone had seen me and reported back. Eleanor's nervous face flashed in my mind. Vince's calculating eyes. Roy's weary dismissal. The threat was clear. They'd attacked my name. Now, they were in my home. What was next? A brick through my window? A fire? I should have called Roy then. But he'd already chosen to see me as the problem. I was on my own. That night, I didn't sleep. Every creak of the old house was a footstep. Every car passing after midnight was circling the block. I sat in my darkened living room, the printed articles on the coffee table, the typed note beside them. At 4:17 a.m., the phone rang. The landline, with its shrill, old-fashioned bell that shattered the silence. No one calls at that hour unless someone is dead. I picked it up, my throat tight. Hello. No voice, just the sound of breathing. Slow, deliberate. Then a click, and the line went dead. They were inside my routines, my home, my head. The psychological loop had closed tight. Every piece of truth I uncovered became a new strand in the rope they were using to strangle my life. The audit was no longer a professional exercise. It was a fight for survival. And as the first gray light of Friday morning seeped through the blinds, I knew one thing. I couldn't win it alone in this quiet house. I had to go back to the one place they'd told me to stay away from, the source of the rotten financial heart. I had to go back to the diner, and I had to make Marty Brewer tell me the truth before his partners in the cold voice decided I was a problem best solved permanently. Friday morning at 7:15 felt like walking onto a battlefield. The bell over the diner door jingled, a sound that had always meant warmth and welcome. Today, it felt like a tripwire alarm. All conversation stopped. Mabel, pouring coffee at the counter, froze. Eleanor didn't even pretend to read. She stared, her mouth a thin, disapproving line. Vince was in his usual spot, but he was watching me like a bird watching a cat. Sheriff Dalton's corner table was empty. Marty was nowhere in sight. My booth was taken. 2 truckers I didn't know sat there, digging into pancakes. A calculated move. Erase my place. Take a seat anywhere, Walt, Mabel said, her voice strained. She wouldn't meet my eyes. I took a small 2-top by the kitchen door, my back to the wall. The familiar smells of bacon and coffee now felt sickly, oppressive. I ordered my usual from Mabel, who scribbled it down and fled. The food arrived 5 minutes later, brought not by Mabel, but by a pimply teenage kid I'd never seen before. The eggs were cold, the toast burnt. The message was clear: you're no longer a regular. You are a nuisance. I was picking at the food when Marty finally emerged from the kitchen. He looked terrible, sweaty, pale, dark circles under his eyes. He saw me and flinched, then veered toward the cash register, busying himself with receipts. This was my shot. I stood up, leaving a 10 on the table, and walked over. The diner was so quiet I could hear the hum of the neon sign outside. "Marty," I said, keeping my voice low, reasonable. The banker's voice. "We need to talk. In your office. Now." He shook his head, still not looking at me. "I got nothing to say to you, Walt. You should go." "I know about Midwest Renewal Partners," I said, the name dropping between us like a stone. "I know about the brownfield grants, the inflated valuations. Marty, they're using you. And when this unravels, you'll be the one holding the bag, not the suits from Cleveland." His head snapped up, pure, undiluted terror in his eyes. Not anger, fear. "You don't know anything. You're going to get us both killed." The last word was a hiss, barely audible. "Then talk to me. Let me help you." Before he could answer, the kitchen door swung open. Vince stood there, holding a bus tub. He'd been listening. His expression was unreadable. "Everything okay out here, Marty? You need a hand?" It wasn't an offer of help. It was a threat. A reminder Marty wasn't alone. "It's fine, Vince," Marty mumbled, his shoulders slumping in defeat. He looked at me, and in that moment I saw it. Not just fear, but a deep, shameful resignation. "Just go home, Walt. Please. Forget what you heard. Forget what you saw." I left. There was nothing else to do. As I walked out, I felt every eye in the place on my back. I'd been publicly, utterly rejected by my own sanctuary. Back home, the isolation pressed in. I was a leper in my own town. My evidence was strong, but it was just paper. I needed a person. I needed someone else to see what I saw. I thought of the one person who might listen, not out of friendship, but out of professional obligation. Cynthia Moss. She was the young, ambitious editor of the Oak Haven Gazette. She'd written a tough piece about county corruption last year. She had no ties to the old guard. I called the paper, asked for her. When I explained I had information about a potential multi-million-dollar fraud involving the downtown sales, she agreed to meet. "Not at the office," she said. "The coffee shop on Elm. 4 p.m. It felt like a lifeline. At 3:45, I gathered my folder, the property records, the LLC charts, the article about Midwest Renewal Partners, the typed threat. Proof. I put on my coat, a sense of grim purpose settling over me. This was the play. Go public. Blow the scheme open. I opened my front door and stepped onto the porch. 2 sheriff's cruisers were parked at the curb. Sheriff Roy Dalton and a young deputy I didn't know were standing on my walkway. Roy's face was like granite. "Walter Clayton," he said, his voice formal, loud enough for Mrs. Gable across the street to hear from behind her curtains. "We have a warrant to search your premises." "On what grounds?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. Suspicion of criminal trespass and attempted burglary. The Sunrise Diner was broken into last night. Back door forced. Cash register emptied. A witness places a man of your description lurking in the alley earlier in the week. He recited it like he was reading a grocery list. We also received another anonymous tip this morning. Said we might find some interesting financial documents here that don't belong to you. The world tilted. They weren't just framing me as unstable. They were framing me as a common criminal. A desperate, broke old man turning to burglary. And they were going to find my research, the very proof of their crime, and claim I'd stolen it. The psychological loop snapped tight again, a steel jaw. My evidence was now their evidence, against me. You're making a terrible mistake, Roy. Step aside, Walt. He didn't call me Mr. Clayton. The last shred of decades-old courtesy was gone. I stood aside. The deputy brushed past me into my house. I stood on my own porch in the full view of my neighbors as the sheriff's department tore my home apart. I watched through the window as the deputy picked up my carefully compiled folder from the hall table and handed it to Roy. Roy flipped through it, his expression not changing. He looked at me through the glass, held up the folder, and gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. Checkmate. They'd outmaneuvered me completely. They'd used the law, the very institution I respected, as their blunt instrument. My reputation was ash. My freedom was next. As they finished their search, finding nothing, of course, because I hadn't broken into anywhere, Roy came back out. "We'll be in touch," he said. He didn't arrest me. It didn't need to. The spectacle was enough. The stain was permanent. The cruisers pulled away. I stood on my ravaged porch, the afternoon sun feeling cold. I missed my meeting with Cynthia Moss. My proof was in police custody, where it would be filed away as the ramblings of a suspect. I was backed into a corner, painted as a thief and a madman. The land grab would proceed. The grants would be filed. The town would be swindled. And I would be the bitter old fool who tried to stand in the way. They'd won. But as I turned to go inside, to face the violated silence of my house, a small, hard knot of defiance tightened in my chest. A banker's defiance. They had the papers, but they didn't have the logic. The numbers still didn't add up. And they'd forgotten one thing about a man who has lost everything except his mind. He has nothing left to lose. I went inside, closed the door on the staring street, and picked up the phone. Not to call a lawyer. Not to call the editor. I called the one person in the tangled web who had shown a flicker of something other than fear or hostility. The person who was new enough to not be fully invested, but who watched and calculated everything. I called Vince's landline. He answered on the second ring. "Vince, it's Walter Clayton. You were at the printing plant before it closed. You know about paper and records and things that are meant to be seen and things that are meant to be hidden." I took a breath, laying my last card on the table. "Meet me. I need to understand what they're really printing." And I think you do too. The silence on the other end was long. Then a single word, quiet and tense. "Where?" The game wasn't over. It had just gone underground. Vince chose the location, the old Oak Haven Memorial Cemetery at sunset. It was a place of perfect, unsettling privacy, where two old men walking among the headstones wouldn't raise an eyebrow. The gray light was fading fast when I saw his lean silhouette by the large elm tree near the back fence. He didn't offer a hand. He just looked at me, his eyes sharp in the gloom. "This is a bad idea, Clayton. For both of us." "I'm out of good ideas," I said. "They have my research. They've got the sheriff in their pocket. They're framing me for burglary. You heard Marty at the diner. He's terrified. This isn't just a scam, Vince. It's a takeover. And when it's done, what happens to the people who helped? Marty get a one-way ticket to Florida and a target on his back if he ever talks. What do you get?" Vince scuffed the ground with his worn work boot. He'd been a foreman at the printing plant. He understood systems, supply chains, pressure. I get left in a dying town with nothing, like everyone else, he muttered. But crossing these people, you saw what they're doing to you. That's why I came to you. You're not part of the old crowd. You watch. You see the pattern. I leaned closer, lower my voice. The plant closed because of environmental citations. Asbestos in the binding glue, right? This whole scheme, it's about poison land and grant money. You know what that looks like up close. He was silent for a long moment, the wind whispering through the pines. The man with the cold voice, Vince finally said, almost himself. He's not from Cleveland. He's local. Uses a Cleveland firm as a glove. He meets Marty after hours. Drives a black SUV with county plates. County plates. The piece of information hit me like a live wire. It connected the outside money to local power. It wasn't just a corrupt sheriff. It was someone in the county government itself. Who, Vince? A commissioner? Someone from the planning office? I keep my head down. I didn't get a name. But his eyes flickered away. He knew more. I need something they can't explain away. I pressed. A document, a record from the plant. Something that shows what was really buried under that mill site. Something that proves the environmental hazard is real, but not what they're claiming. Vince let out a short, bitter laugh. You think they left a paper trail? The plant managers shredded everything that wasn't nailed down when the EPA came sniffing. But you were a foreman. You didn't manage paper. You managed people. And people remember. I was gambling now, using every instinct from a lifetime of lone interviews. Someone who worked the night shift. Someone who saw the dumping. The drums they buried before the fire. A name, Vince. Just a name. He looked at me, a war raging behind his eyes. Fear versus a deep, rusty sense of injustice. The town had used him and tossed him aside. Now a newer, slicker version was doing it again. Charlie Blevins, he whispered, the name torn from him. Old groundskeeper at the mill site before it burned. He lived in a shack out there. Saw everything. He's in a county rest home now. Senile, they say. Or maybe just smart enough to play senile. It was a thread. A fragile one. Thank you, Vince. Don't thank me. I didn't give you anything. He turned to leave, then paused. And Clayton? The county plates. The last 3 digits were 717. That's all I got. He melted into the shadows between the headstones. I stood alone as full dark fell, the numbers already arranging themselves in my mind. 717. A county vehicle identifier. A key to the cold voice. The next morning, I went to the Oak Haven County Long-Term Care Facility. It was a bleak brick building that smelled of antiseptic and boiled vegetables. Charlie Blevins was in a shared room by a window, a tiny man lost in a bed, staring at a game show on a muted TV. His hands, resting on the blanket, were a map of scars and calluses. Mr. Blevins? My name is Walter. I'm looking into the history of the old mill property. For a town heritage project. The lie tasted sour. He turned his head slowly. His eyes were milky with cataracts, but they held a glint of sharp, bird-like awareness. Heritage, he repeated, his voice a dry rustle. That's a word for it. They heritaged all them drums right into the ground, didn't they? My pulse jumped. Drums? For the dye. He gave a wheezing chuckle. Dye, solvent, God knows. The foreman, slick fellow from the city, he'd bring him in after midnight. We'd dig a pit out by the old loading dock. Time capsule for the future, he called it. Laughed when he said it. Charlie's gaze drifted to the window. Future's here now, ain't it? Did you ever tell anyone? The fire inspectors? The EPA? Told my wife. She said keep your mouth shut if you want to keep your job. He blinked slowly. Then the fire came. Convenient, that. Burned the records and scared off the questions. I asked him for the foreman's name. He shook his head. Gone. Like smoke. But then he pointed a bony finger at me. The man who owns the ground now. He knows. He was the lawyer for the mill owners back then. Smooth talker. Got him off the hook for the fire. Now he's back, digging up his own mess, I reckon. A lawyer. The pieces assembled with a quiet, terrible click. The cold voice. The legal knowledge to set up shells. The connections to both the old mill owners and the current county government. It wasn't a faceless Cleveland firm. It was a local devil who knew where all the bodies and the chemical drums were buried. His name, Charlie. What was his name? But the moment had passed. Charlie's eyes clouded over, retreating into the fog. I'm tired, he mumbled, turning back to the silent, flickering TV. I left the rest home with a name half formed in my mind and a conviction solid as stone. The villain was here. He'd been here for decades. He'd created the poison, covered it up, and now he was coming back to profit from the cleanup. A cleanup he would ensure never happened. I drove straight to the county administration building. I needed to see the vehicle registry. 717. I marched to the clerk's office, my heart pounding with a furious energy. I was done being passive. The clerk, a young woman with glasses, looked up. Can I help you? I need to see the motor pool registry for county-assigned vehicles. Plate identifier 717. She frowned. That's not public record, sir. You need a FOIA request, and that takes weeks. This is about a fraudulent land scheme costing taxpayers millions. I think the public has a right to know now. My raised voice drew attention. A door to an inner office opened, and a man stepped out. He was in his late 50s, impeccably dressed in a gray suit, with silvering hair and the calm, assessing eyes of a predator. He was the picture of county authority. Can I be of assistance? He asked, his voice a smooth, cultured baritone. It was the voice from the diner alley. The cold voice. My blood turned to ice. I was staring right at him. Mr. Clayton, isn't it? He continued, a faint, polite smile on his lips. He extended a hand. Silas Thorne, County Council. I've heard you've been having some difficulties lately. We're all very concerned. Silas Thorne, the lawyer who got the mill owners off the hook. The man whose county plate ended in 717. The architect. He had stepped out of the shadows, not because he was exposed, but because he was confident. He was showing me that he operated in the light with impunity. He wasn't just a suspect. He was the system I was trying to fight. And he was shaking my hand, his grip firm and dry, while his eyes promised that my difficulties were only just beginning. The misdirection was over. The enemy had a name and a title, and he was standing right in front of me, in the heart of his own castle. Silas Thorne's handshake was a masterpiece of controlled power. It lasted a second too long. Perhaps we should speak in my office, Mr. Clayton. Clear the air. It wasn't an invitation. It was a command. The young clerk watched wide-eyed. Refusing would make me look unstable, exactly as he'd framed me. I nodded, my throat tight. His office was what I expected. Dark wood, leather, framed diplomas, and civic awards. The window looked out over the courthouse square. He sat behind his desk, steepling his fingers. I'll be blunt, Walter. May I call you Walter? Your actions are causing distress. To Marty Brewer, to the sheriff's department, and frankly, to the smooth operation of county business. County business like approving fraudulent brownfield grants. I said, remaining standing. There was no point in pretending. His smile didn't falter. It was chilling. I admire your tenacity. A retired banker with a keen eye. But you're looking at a complex public-private revitalization project and seeing ghosts. The sale price of the diner reflects not just bricks and mortar, but goodwill, historic value, and future potential. Appraisals can be subjective. $3.2 million is not subjective. It's a fiction. And Charlie Blevins at the rest home isn't a ghost. He remembers the drums you buried for the mill. For the first time, a tiny fissure appeared in his composure, a slight narrowing of the eyes. He hadn't expected me to get to Charlie. He recovered instantly, a sad man with dementia. His testimony wouldn't be admissible in traffic court, whereas he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a confidential murmur, a documented pattern of harassment, coupled with an attempted burglary charge that has real weight. Walter. It could mean loss of your pension, your home. A very public, very ugly end. The threat was naked now. He wasn't denying the crime. He was stating the cost of opposing him. Why come after me personally? I asked, a desperate part of me still seeking the human logic. I'm just a retired man. You could have ignored me. You're not just anything, he said, a hint of genuine irritation flashing. You're Walter Clayton. You balance the books for this town for a generation. When you talk, certain people still listen. You're a loose end with credibility. I can't have you picking at the threads of this project. It's too important. For the county's future. He said it with the fervor of a true believer. In his mind, he wasn't a thief. He was a visionary, and I was a stubborn piece of the past in his way. So you sent Roy Dalton to my house. You had my mailbox destroyed. He spread his hands, the picture of innocence. I have no idea what you're talking about. Sheriff Dalton is an elected official acting on evidence. As for vandalism, that's a police matter. He stood up, signaling the end. My advice, Walter, take a long trip. Visit family. Your health has clearly been under strain since Clara passed. Everyone would understand. He was herding me toward the door, both physically and narratively. The lonely, sick, grieving widower. The perfect exit. I left his office, the taste of defeat copper-sharp in my mouth. He was insulated, protected by law, reputation, and a terrified sheriff. My next move had to be perfect, or it would be my last. I didn't go home. I drove to the next county over to a strip mall with a pay-as-you-go cell phone store. I bought a burner phone with cash. Then I went to the public library there and used a computer. If Thorne controlled the local system, I had to go outside it. I drafted an email attaching scanned images of my key documents, the LLC charts, the article on Midwest Renewal, my notes on Charlie Blevins. I didn't send it to the local paper. Cynthia Moss was likely compromised or intimidated by now. I sent it to the State Attorney General's office, Financial Crimes Division, and to an investigative reporter at the Cleveland Plain Dealer, whose byline I'd seen on corruption stories. The subject line, urgent, evidence of multi-million-dollar grant fraud and environmental cover-up in Oak Haven County. I hit send. It was a flare shot into the night. It might be intercepted, ignored, or too slow. But it was something. As I drove back into Oak Haven in the deepening dusk, a profound exhaustion settled over me. I'd done all I could. I stopped at a gas station on the edge of town to fill up. While the tank ran, I went inside to buy a bottle of water. The kid behind the counter was watching a small TV. The local news was on. The banner at the bottom read, "Breaking. Suspect in diner burglary fatally struck." My blood turned to ice. The screen showed the train tracks on the south side of town, flashing lights, a sheet-covered form. The reporter's voice was grave. Authorities confirmed the deceased is Vincent Moreno, 58, of Oak Haven. Sheriff Roy Dalton states Moreno was a person of interest in the recent Sunrise Diner break-in and was reportedly fleeing questioning when the accident occurred. The investigation is ongoing. Vince, struck by a train, fleeing questioning. I stood frozen, the water bottle slipping from my hand and thumping to the floor. It wasn't an accident. It was a cleanup. Vince had talked to me. He'd given me Charlie's name and the plate number. And Thorne had found out. The burner phone in my pocket felt like a live coal. If they could do that to Vince for a few scraps of information, what would they do to me, who had just emailed the state? I drove home in a daze, every shadow holding a threat. My house was dark. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking. I got inside, locked the door, and leaned against it, breathing hard. The red light on my landline answering machine was blinking. One new message. I pressed play. It was Silas Thorne's voice, calm, almost pleasant. "Walter, I heard about Vincent Moreno. A terrible tragedy. Such a reckless man. It really underscores how dangerous it is to be involved with the wrong people or to have loose ends. I do hope you're reconsidering my advice about that trip. For your own safety, have a good evening. The message ended with a soft click. It was no longer a threat against my reputation or freedom. It was a threat against my life, wrapped in a condolence. Vince's death was the demonstration. The complication was absolute. I had taken my shot to a higher authority, but the enemy was here, now, and he had just shown he was willing to kill. The state AG might move in weeks. A train could move in seconds. I was trapped in my own home, with a killer who wore a suit and spoke in the reasonable tones of county government. The psychological loop had become a noose. Every move to expose the truth had accelerated the danger. I looked out my dark window at the quiet street. Someone was out there, watching, waiting to see if I packed my car, waiting to see if the message had been received. I turned off the living room light and sat in the dark. The numbers didn't matter anymore. The evidence didn't matter. This was a primal equation now. Survive until sunrise and hope the outside world I just alerted was faster than the very local, very real evil sitting in the county building. The game had changed. It was no longer an audit. It was a siege. The night was the longest of my life. Every sound was amplified. The groan of the old furnace, a branch scraping the roof, a distant siren. I moved from window to window, peering through the blinds at the empty street. No black SUVs, no sheriff's cruisers, just the oppressive quiet of a town that had already judged and condemned me. Silas Thorne's message played on a loop in my head. A terrible tragedy. Loose ends. Vince was a loose end. I was the biggest loose end of all. By 5 a.m., a pale gray light began to bleed into the sky. The rational part of my brain, the banker, reasserted itself. Thorne had shown his ultimate card, murder. But murder is messy. It attracts a different kind of attention, even with a sheriff in your pocket. His power was in manipulation, paperwork, and fear. Vince's accident was a masterstroke of pressure, but it was also a risk. He wouldn't want another body so soon. He wanted me to run, to disappear into the narrative of a broken old man. That was his weakness. He needed the story to hold. I had one card left to play, and it had to be in the light of day, in a place he couldn't ignore. The Oakhaven County Weekly Commissioners meeting. It was public. It was televised on the local access channel. It started at 10 a.m. At 9:30, I put on my best suit, the one I'd worn to Claire's funeral. I looked like the Walter Clayton of old. Respectable, trustworthy, a pillar. The disguise was my armor. I carried no papers. I carried only the burner phone in my pocket. The county administration building felt like walking into a dragon's den. The clerk from the previous day did a double take as I passed. I didn't go to the public seating area. I walked straight to the front and signed the sheet to speak during the public comment period. Silas Thorne was already at the dais, conferring with one of the commissioners. He saw me. For a fraction of a second, the polished mask slipped, revealing pure, icy surprise. Then it was back, replaced by a look of polite, concerned interest. The meeting droned through zoning variances and road maintenance contracts. My heart was a drum against my ribs. Finally, the chairman called my name. Walter Clayton, you have 3 minutes. I stood at the podium, the microphone cold under my hands. I could feel Thorne's gaze, Roy Dalton's stare from the back of the room, and the curious eyes of 24 citizens. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I began, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm here today about transparency and about the future of our town. Specifically, about the sale of the Sunrise Diner and the associated land, assembly by entities linked to Midwest Renewal Partners. I saw Thorne tense. He hadn't expected me to go public here. He'd expected cowering or flight. The sale price is a fiction, I continued, looking not at Thorne, but at the commissioners. It's designed to inflate the value of a downtown block for the purpose of securing fraudulent state brownfield cleanup grants. The environmental hazard is real. Chemical drums buried by the old mill. But the man who orchestrated the cover-up for the mill owners decades ago is now orchestrating the profit scheme today. He is using county resources and authority to do it. A murmur went through the room. The chairman leaned forward. "Mr. Clayton, those are serious allegations. Do you have evidence?" "The evidence is in the property records anyone can pull. It's in the business registration of the shell companies. And it's in the memory of Charlie Blevins, the old mill groundskeeper now in the county home, who can tell you about the midnight burials." I turned now and looked directly at Silas Thorne. But the most important evidence is sitting at this dais. County Counsel Silas Thorne. He represented the mill owners in the civil suit after the fire. He secured the non-disclosure agreements. He knows exactly what's buried there. And the county vehicle with plate identifier 717, which was used to intimidate witnesses, is assigned to his office. The room erupted. Thorne was on his feet, his face a mask of outraged dignity. "This is slanderous nonsense. Mr. Clayton is a troubled man, as Sheriff Dalton can attest. He's under investigation for burglary." "I am a troubled man," I said, my voice rising over the din. "I'm troubled that a county official would conspire to steal from the people he's sworn to serve. I'm troubled that a witness who spoke to me, Vincent Moreno, is now dead in a so-called accident. And I'm deeply troubled that the only response to questions is threats and character assassination." I pulled the burner phone from my pocket. At 4:14 p.m. yesterday, I emailed all the documentation for this scheme to the state attorney general and the Cleveland Plain dealer. The cat, as they say, is out of the bag. So, Mr. Thorne, you can have the sheriff arrest me now. But you won't be arresting the story. And you won't be able to explain why the state's investigators will find your fingerprints on every single part of this fraud. I placed the phone on the podium. My 3 minutes are up. The silence that followed was absolute, stunned. I had done it. I had called the devil by his name in front of his entire congregation. Thorne stared at me, his earlier composure completely gone. It was replaced by a look of dawning, horrific realization. He hadn't lost just the battle. He had lost the war of perception, right here in his own stronghold. The public story was now mine. Sheriff Dalton took a step forward, but a commissioner held up a hand. "Roy, not here. Not now." The meeting descended into chaos. Reporters from the local paper surged forward. Thorne was surrounded by commissioners demanding explanations. I stood my ground, a frail old man in a good suit, as the world he had built began to crack and crumble around him. He had tried to use the system to crush me. In the end, I used the last fragile tool of that very system, a public microphone and the truth to break him. The reveal wasn't in a dark alley or a private confrontation. It was in the sterile, fluorescent light of a government room for all to see. The accountant had finally read the statement aloud, and the numbers didn't lie. The fallout wasn't an explosion. It was a slow, inexorable collapse, like a building whose foundation had been quietly eaten away. The state attorney general's office, tipped by my email and the very public scene at the commissioner's meeting, opened a preliminary inquiry within 48 hours. That was the death knell for Silas Thorne's operation. The Cleveland Reporter's article ran 3 days later, detailing the Oak Haven shell game, naming Thorne, Midwest Renewal Partners, and the suspicious land deals. It made the front page. With the heat on, the careful structure of lies crumbled. Marty Brewer, terrified of being the next Vince, walked into the AG's field office with his lawyer. He cut a deal. He confirmed everything. The coerced sale, the inflated price, Thorne's threats, and the cold-voiced instructions to frame me. His testimony was the nail in the coffin. The burglary charges against me were formally dropped. Sheriff Roy Dalton issued a terse statement saying the investigation had taken new directions. He announced his early retirement the following week, citing health reasons. Nobody bought it. The election for his replacement was suddenly the hottest topic in town. Charlie Blevins, the senile groundskeeper, gave a surprisingly coherent video deposition from his rest home bed, describing the midnight drum burials in vivid detail. The AG's environmental unit got a warrant and took core samples from the old mill site. They found the time capsules. As for Silas Thorne, he resigned as county council to focus on his family and private practice. It was a graceful exit that lasted exactly 1 week. He was arrested at his home on a slew of charges: conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud, witness intimidation, and, following the re-examination of Vincent Moreno's death, suspicion of manslaughter. The train accident was being treated as a homicide. He posted bail, but his reputation, his power, and his perfectly tailored life were finished. The Sunrise Diner sale was voided. Marty, under the terms of his deal, forfeited the illicit down payment but kept his diner. He's quieter now. The laugh doesn't shake the cups anymore. I go in sometimes on a Wednesday. He nods. Mabel brings my coffee. We don't speak of it. Some cracks can't be plastered over. In the end, they didn't get the grants. The land grab fell apart. The out-of-town developers slunk back to Cleveland. Oak Haven's downtown block remained, for better or worse, its sleepy, slightly shabby self. For me, the victory was quiet. The neighbors who had peered from behind curtains now offered hesitant smiles at the mailbox. My name was cleared, but the memory of the shunning, the bent mailbox, the cold eggs served in silence. Those things leave a chill in the bones that never fully goes away. I sold the big old house. Too many echoes, both old and new. I moved into a tidy garden apartment near the library. Fewer stairs, less to protect. One afternoon, a month after it was all over, a certified letter arrived. It was from the state attorney general's office. A formal notice that, due to my instrumental role in uncovering the fraud, I was entitled to a portion of the recovered assets as a whistleblower award. A sum that, while not life-changing, was significant. A reward for nearly getting killed over a pile of paper. I thought about Clara. I thought about Vince. I thought about the quiet, stubborn pride of a man who just wanted his coffee to be hot and his friends to be true. I endorsed the check over to the Oak Haven Historical Society with a stipulation: it be used to create a proper archive to digitize and preserve the town's records, the good, the bad, and the buried, so that no one could ever again try to rewrite our history for profit. The story made the local paper again. Former Banker Fund's History Project. This time, the picture they used was a good one. Sometimes on my walk to the library, I pass the diner. I see the regulars through the window. Eleanor with her book. New faces at my old booth. The world turns. You make your peace with it. They say you can't fight City Hall. Maybe not, but you can audit it. You can stand at a public podium with your hands trembling, not from Parkinson's, but from fear, and you can read the numbers aloud. And if the numbers are wrong, truly wrong, they have a power of their own. They don't care about your age or your reputation or the cold voice of a man in a suit. They just are. My name is Walter Clayton. I'm 70 years old. I was a bank manager. And for one long, terrible week, I was the most dangerous man in Oak Haven. Not because I had a gun, but because I still knew how to read a ledger. And in the end, the only entry that mattered was the truth. It balanced. And here we are at the end of the story. If you enjoyed listening, show some love with a thumbs up and share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. There's plenty more coming. Until then, take care. Bye.